What is going on, guys? Welcome back. This is episode number 12 in this series. If you guys are brand new to this series or my channel, you should definitely head back and check out the previous videos. There will be a link right here on the screen, so you can click on that and view the full playlist. And this is actually part 3 of a mini series that I'm doing. So if you want to see the first 2 parts to this series, definitely head to that playlist and check those out as well. So in this video, we're actually setting up the filtering. I said that I was going to cover the filtering and the sorting, but in this video, I actually only covered the filtering just because there were a lot of other things that I was working on and showing you guys. So for this, we actually set up we've got our little listener going, and I don't have the animation set up, and you guys will see what's going on with that in this video. But we have it so that when we actually click on our weapons now, we can see all of our weapons being drawn, and it removes all of our other items. And then same thing with our armor and everything else. And some of these filters aren't set up yet, but we have our all items too, so when we click that, we'll see all of our items again as well. And then if we just take a look at the code we set up, we actually just put in our option that we have our selecting our filter option, and we added our listeners to each of those options as well. And that was pretty much what we did for this video. Like I said, I was kind of talking about a lot of other stuff in this video, and I may have gotten sidetracked in some areas. But I hope you guys enjoy the video, and be sure to leave it a like down below if you guys are enjoying this series so far. And be sure to subscribe too, that would be awesome. You guys won't miss any content that way. Alright guys, well I hope you enjoy this video. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and get started with the navigation first. So in here, we see that we have our inventory and all of our items listed here. So what we're going to be doing is building the navigation window, or the filter window in this case, that we designed here. So the idea is that when you click on the pencil icon up here, you can edit the filter that you're actually searching by. So you can change it to your general or your weapons, armor, so on. So we're going to go ahead and build that actual navigation window first. So inside of our HTML page, we're going to find our HD inventory window. And just at the bottom here, we're just going to create a new div for our actual navigation. So we'll do an ID of HD inventory nav. And now what we want to do is style this nav. So we'll jump into our CSS, and we've got our HD, all of our inventory CSS right here. So we'll go ahead and define then our HD inventory nav, and we'll give this some styling now. We have our position absolute. We're going to want a width of 100% and a height of 100%. So this item actually takes up the full container and will sit in the top left corner. So we'll give this a left of 0 and a top of 0. So now that we have our navigation actually positioned, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into our HTML and make sure that we give this a background and stuff so we can see it. So we want to give this a class of our dark gradient so we can have that background applied to our actual window. So now if we look, it should just be a box covering up everything that we already had there. So what we want to do is, of course, just to fix our little styling issues here, is go ahead and add that border radius that we have on the actual container itself, which I believe is 15 pixels. So I believe that's this right here. So if we just add that border radius of 15 pixels, it'll look a lot better now for us. So let's just take a look. So now you see we've just got our blank slate here, and it's actually just our blank window that's covering up all of the content we had there before. So now if we go back into here, and now we just want to add those actual navigation options. So the first thing that we're going to do is inside this nav, we want to make a wrapper to wrap around all of those names. So this div inside of our nav, we're just going to give a class of, let's just say, inventory nav inner. I'm probably going to end up changing some of this stuff later on, but we'll use that for now. So inside of this now, we're just going to, let's just create ourselves maybe some H4 tags where we actually put our names of all of our items in here. So let's start with general, and we'll just add a couple of these just to make sure that it's working correctly. So we'll do weapons and then our armor. And so now we'll actually take a look at that working. So in the inventory nav now, let's just give these a few styles. So inside of our CSS, let's just jump in here and give this new class some styles here. And before I go any further on this real quick, I just wanted to mention that I know that my CSS is a little crazy right now, and normally this isn't how you would build things. The idea is I'm doing a lot of stuff that I do in my CSS is kind of repeated over and over again. And I know some of you have commented on, my CSS isn't very modular. And the reason that I do that for these videos at least is because I want to just show you guys how everything's built rather than just use a bunch of classes that have a bunch of stylings that you don't really see me actually putting in. And so I'm probably going to end up changing a lot of this stuff later on where I add a lot more modularity to my CSS. And later on, you'll potentially see me working with a lot of classes that have predefined styles. For instance, the nav here, I gave it these 5 stylings, but I had actually set myself up with a basic styling for that inside of the general, where if I use my ABS 100 class, it achieves the same effect. So it saves me from having to write all of these things out because I do use these 5 styles together quite often. So in this case, I could delete these guys here and I could just jump back into our HTML and just apply that class to this actual element. And you'll see that it achieves the same effect when we reload. It's just a little bit cleaner and nicer method of doing it because it is a reusable class that I use pretty often in my code. But with that being said, we'll actually take a look at a couple of other useful classes. So another one that I'm going to use probably for this next box is actually our ABS center, because this will actually give us a centered div, and it saves me from having to rewrite all of these different things right here, especially with all of the prefixes for our transforms. So if I use this ABS center, you'll notice that when I jump into my HTML and add that class to the inner tag now, we can use that center class to actually center all of those texts in the middle. So now you'll see that that div is actually placed directly in the middle, and it saves us from having to write all of that code out when I just can add that class very easily. So that's just some advice I recommend whenever you are working with CSS, that if you find yourself using a certain number of styles together all the time, that you should probably just make a separate class for those so that you can recycle that class and not have to continue to write those styles over and over again when you continuously repeat the same things. But in any case, let's continue working on these items now. So we know the H4s, we want to style these. So what we'll do is in our CSS now, instead of using, because we're probably not even going to use this ID that we made here now, we'll just access the H4s now, and we'll just go ahead and give these some styling. So first of all, we're going to do a text align center because we know we want them to be centered in this navigation. So in this case, besides just adding our text align center, I also added a padding of 10 pixels, and I'll probably just add a margin as well, but I could reduce this padding to maybe 5 pixels and then give us a 5 pixel margin as well. And then of course just adding our pointer cursor so that we can see the arrow or the pointer when we actually go over it. So if we refresh this now and take a look at what we have, we've got a nice margin in between each of these, and we've got our pointer over there, and we may even need a little bit more space or maybe make the text a little bit bigger as well, but we'll worry about that stuff later on. So for now, we've got our actual styling in there, and we can add as many of those H4s as we want, and it will continue to be centered for us in the middle and continue to be nicely spaced out. So what we can do technically is just put this stuff in our actual script and write it out. So if we have all of our filters actually saved, we can do that. But for this video, I'm probably actually not going to write those out in script at the moment. I'm probably just going to write them in here and then add them to script later on. I still have to remember the order because we recently changed it. I know I said in a previous video that our weapons and armor were, 1, our item ID 1, and this was 2, and then all the rest of the items were 3. But we recently changed that so that all the different items have their own number now, so we can tell them apart when we actually are returned our data. And just to clarify what I'm talking about, if we take a look in our actual inventory array that we have down here, we had our item type. So the idea here is that 3 is now associated with just or. So in this case, we have our coal, and that is our item type 3, and then remembering that our weapons is 1 and our armor is 2, and then I believe its herbs is 4, potions 5, and general maybe 6. I think that's how it's listed now, but I can't remember exactly the order. But in any case, we'll just go ahead and add all of those things anyway. So we'll get our H4 for our ore here, and then we'll do herbs, and then we'll do our potions, and then finally just our general items. So now if we take a look, we've got all of our items that we had. I believe we've covered everything that we had on our list here. So this will be the cool navigation that we're actually working with and that we can add our event listeners to actually get this filter working. So let's actually start scripting this a little bit. So first of all, we want this to open when we click on that little pencil, and then we want it to close when we actually decide which option that we're going to choose. And for this video, let's experiment a little bit more with, instead of using like my easy animate function or module that I was using before to get our animations, let's try messing around with some CSS transitions and actually switching around classes and stuff like that too. So if we look in here, we know that by default this navigation will not be displayed, and if we want it to fade in as well, we can go ahead and use a class, another class from my general CSS just called off, which in this case will display none and give it just an opacity of 0. So if we jump back in and just apply that off class now to our actual HD inventory nav, we can use that to actually remove that navigation from the view when we first load up the game. So now you'll notice that it is no longer displayed, which is exactly what we wanted. But what we're going to do actually here in the general, let's actually just add another class here of on. And this one will actually have a display of block and an opacity of 1. So now with this on class, if we use this with a transition, we should probably be able to just animate our opacity in and out using our switching class method. So in here, let's define a new function to add our listeners. So we want to add listeners to that actual pencil icon because that's what's going to open that menu for us. And so we'll just add an ID to this image and we'll just call it inventory nav open for right now. So this is actually our button that opens our nav, and we'll just go ahead and jump into our script now, and we want to do a doc.getElement by ID. And we just want to go ahead and paste in that new name, and then we're going to go ahead and add an event listener for when we click on this. So now what we can do actually is create a separate function here that actually listens for this. So what we'll do is right under this just create another function that's called toggle nav. And so now what we can do is in this case use jQuery, and so we'll actually pass in the toggle that we want. So we know that when we call toggle nav, we want to pass in true because we want to open this. So what we can do here is actually say that inside of our HTML we want to actually grab this nav ID, and now we want to say that inside of here we want to grab this element with jQuery, and we want to just add, in this case add class, and we're going to be adding and removing a class, so we'll have 2 of them here. And so now for this we just want to say we're going to add the class. First we're going to check to see if toggle is true, then that means we're toggling it on. So we want this to go to, we want to use our on class. Otherwise we want to add our off class if toggle is false. And then what we're going to do is just go ahead and use the very opposite for this one. So we would want to remove our off class and add our on class. And then I realized I just made one mistake. I already had an add listeners function here that I didn't realize. So all I did was copy our listener that we built here and just added it down here. And so we can go ahead and delete this function now because that will do add both those listeners for us inside of here instead. So now if we go ahead and refresh, I already did try this and it did work. So we have our inventory open here, and I'm just going to close this for more space right here. So if we open this now, you'll see that when we click on this, it actually displays the menu, and that's exactly what we wanted. And the only thing that we wanted was just for it to be a little bit smoother and actually add a transition to that. So in this case, if we want to add a transition, the smartest way to do this would probably be to make a separate class and stuff for it, but in this case we're just going to add our transition right here. So we'll add just a transition on the opacity, and let's do like our 0.2 or maybe 3 seconds, and then we'll just add our ease in out. Let's give that a shot. So let's see how that actually looks. And actually, now that I think about it, it was kind of stupid of me I was trying to figure out why the animation transition wasn't working for us. And actually, it was just because of, I believe just because of the way it's being displayed, none, and the opacity. Because if you take a look, if you remove the display none and then the opacity, it will fade in. but if you actually remove the opacity first and then the display, it'll just show up immediately. And also, one of the things that I was going to say, you guys probably already noticed, because obviously all you have to do is take away the off class. You don't really need to add an on class, because of the fact that if you remove the display none and the opacity of 0, then obviously then it will be displayed and have an opacity. So in this case, you wouldn't need to use the on class at all. But what we'll do in this case is we'll actually just write our HD inventory nav. And what we'll do in this case is actually we'll say that if we're toggling this, we want to access the remove. Otherwise, we want to access the add. And then we'll go ahead and actually just put that inside of our parentheses and then add our class string. So all we're doing is we're just grabbing either the add class or the remove class function based on whether we're toggling. And then we'll go ahead and just call that now, passing in our off. And so now I believe this should work, and I'm not sure if it's going to fix the actual animation problem that we're having. And you'll notice that it actually didn't solve it, so we still don't have the animation running. But I'm going to have to figure out a little bit more about the animation stuff, because I'm not actually used to using CSS animations for this kind of thing. But this actually may be a better solution. I'm just going to have to look into that a little bit more. But for now, we're actually just going to get our items set up and filtered with these actual nav options. So I'm not going to worry too much about the animations right now. And so now inside of all these H4s, we want to just add, let's just say we want to add a data key now, because this will be associated to the actual filter option. So in this case, what we can do is probably just number these all separate. So if we did 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or all the way down to 6 in this case. And the reason that you number them like this is because I believe that's how they're all going to be returned to us from the back end with keys that match these. So what we can do is actually just use this data key to grab the correct items based on their item type. So what we'll do now inside of our script is we want to add listeners to all of those H4s now. So we'll just do it inside of this for now, just because I'm trying to save some time for this video. But normally I would separate these things out. But we're going to do our LEs, and then we want to go ahead and grab our actual nav inner. Or in this case, we could just grab our nav. It doesn't really make any difference. But we're going to do our doc.getElementById, and we want to go ahead and paste that in. And now for this, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to do get elements by class name, or in this case, tag name. So we're just going to go ahead and grab those H4s so that we can run through a loop of them and add listeners to all of them. So the length will obviously be our LEs.length, and then we will go ahead and run through a for loop of those elements. So now to grab the elements in the array, we'll just do our index, and then we'll go ahead and add an event listener, and this will be our click listener. And now we want to go ahead and inside of this, just to test that it's working, we'll do a console log and just grab this.dataset.key. Just because we want to make sure that we're grabbing the correct key here. So let's go ahead and refresh, and now if we actually test out our new filter and check our console, you'll see now that when we actually click on our options, we're getting returned that data key that's actually saved. So we can use that data key now to actually figure out what the item is for the item type. So now what we can do is create a separate function here that we're going to actually call when we click on one of these options. So now what this will do is, let's just say we want this to be called select filter option. So now in this case, what we would want to do is pass in that key. So now we'll say we do that, and now instead of this console log, we want to call our select filter option, passing in that this.dataset.key. And so now this select filter option has access to that key of the option that we clicked on. And now what we're going to do is directly associate that with the actual item. We know that our actual inventory array is directly associated with the actual items that are drawn out because we're running through them directly. So in this case, what we can do, and not necessarily what I'll end up doing because I'll probably have to make some changes, but what we can do is run through our actual inventory. So we have a variable In this case, we'll actually just get the player's inventory again. So if we just do our player.getInventory function that we used before, and actually, yeah, just define this as our inventory here, and then we can grab the length of that inventory to run through it. So we'll just do that inventory.length, and then we'll go ahead and run through this now. And like I said, I'm going to be making some changes later, but for now what we can do is actually just grab the element we're going to check to see if the inventory item is actually matching the key that we passed in, or its actual item type. Or actually, we don't even need to make an if statement, because really we can just use what we did here. So I'll actually just copy this, and in this case we're going to be grabbing the element instead of that, and we're actually going to be toggling this based on the key. So we want to check to see, instead of toggle, we want to check to see if this key equals the inventory item type, because each item has our item type. So we'll check to see if the key actually matches that item type. Then we want to go ahead and remove the off class, because we know we want it to be on. So even if it's not on, it just won't remove it. So either way, if it's there or if it's not there, it'll call the remove. It'll either work or not work, but it's not going to break our code at all. So in this case, we just have to grab our element now. So we can just do our LEs and set that equal to our doc.get elements by class name in this case, and we'll grab them by that HD inventory item class. So now what we know we can do is just go ahead and pass in that element here. So if we just pass in LE's we know in this case that the element is directly associated with the inventory array that we have here, because we're not manipulating it all yet. Like I said a bunch of times, I'm going to be changing this, but this is just for demonstrating how we're going to get this filtering working. So now this will run through a loop of all of the actual HTML elements, and either apply or remove the off class based on whether the item actually matches the item key that we passed in. And then the last thing we want to do is we just want to close our actual overlay or our navigation. So we're going to call our toggle nav, and we're going to pass in false. So that's actually going to close the navigation for us. And so now if we refresh and we actually open up our inventory again, you'll notice that all of our items are here. But now if we go ahead and click here, it'll open up our navigation. And now if we click on our weapons, you'll see that now it actually got rid of everything else besides our weapons, because those have the matching key that we passed in. And then same thing, if we click armor now, it'll show us all of our armor. And then of course the one thing we need to fix now is the all items, because when we click on all items, we're passing in an item key of 0. And since none of the items have an item key of 0, we can't actually use that. So what we can do in this case, if we want to make a long, ugly looking if statement here, we could just add it to here and say that, or if the inventory item type equals 0 in this case. Oh, and I made one mistake. This isn't supposed to be the item, it's supposed to just be the key. So you're just checking to see if the key equals 0, then you know that you would want to just remove that off class so that you would display all of them. So now if we go ahead and try it, we'll notice that when we click on weapons, you'll have all of our weapons, and then if we go back to all items, it'll show us all of our items again. And so besides just the animation on our menu and a couple of other things that I would change, this is working how I would want it to work. And so one more thing before I actually end this video, I just wanted to address the comma thing that I had mentioned I was going to talk about in the comments of the last video. So I know that I had skipped a little portion of the last video where I removed the comma that was there, and really all I did was, instead of adding the comma at the end of the string I believe that we have here, I changed it so that we removed the comma there, and then I just added the comma in the beginning. And the reason I did that is so that we wouldn't have to splice off that last comma, because now the comma is actually in the beginning. So you'll notice that the comma is being added right here inside of the stat string, and that's why the comma is blue instead of green now, is because it's being added at the end of that stat string. And I'd probably end up making that comma white later on for the styling, but for the time being it gives us the effect that we want. But alright guys, I hope this video was super helpful and informative, and I know that there are a couple of things that like I said, I was going to go back and change, and I may make another video later on where I kind of go over how I actually update the inventory later on. In this case, I know that there's a lot of things in my code that I would change, but I'm trying to just hurry up because I know that I've been working on this for quite a while and I kind of want to just get this version done with, so I'm trying to push out these skills as quickly as possible, but I'm going to end up making some changes later on. But if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to leave me a like down below, and like I said, comment with suggestions on the next upcoming videos if you have any ideas for what you want to see specifically. Like I said, we have a couple of things we still need to cover, and if you guys are really enjoying this series so far, be sure to subscribe, and if this was your first video, be sure to head back and check out the other videos in this series. My face is on the screen right here in the corner, so go ahead and just click on that and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.